good. So now we're live. We have people coming in from Camino and beyond. I'm here with John, Matt, and Shez. Where are you guys right now? Where are you
I'm in
tuning in
Kingston,
from?
Kingston, Ontario.
I'm in Toronto, well, a suburb outside of the city, Oakville, to be specific.
Nice.
I'm in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
Fun stuff. We have one American on the call. That's great. And then I am in Calgary, where Camino's headquarters are. Awesome. So we got a couple people still filtering in here. If you guys want to send in the chat where you guys are coming from as well, we'd love to find out and see where you all are coming from. Also, if you guys have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to send them through the chat or the QA, and we will answer those all at the end. Awesome. Now we'll kind of get started here. I'm wondering, from you guys, what is your background in audio sound? Why are you guys experts, and where do you specialize in? Because I know you guys specialize in different areas. We'll start with John.
Yeah, well, my background is, I guess I have a couple of backgrounds that sort of formed this confluence over the years. I started my career in radio broadcasting, primarily as a producer. And I've been, as you probably tell from the background, I've been a musician for most of my life. So audio branding just was sort of a natural kind of thing for me. Again, they just sort of came together. I've been running Titan Sound for close to 10 years now, and it's just sort of evolved over the years where, I sort of took my media background and kind of brought in sort of these broader interests and worked it into the branding world. And yeah, in terms of specialty, I mean, audio branding's pretty broad. I think if I were to highlight my strengths as an audio branding expert, they're probably in sort of composition and weaving in sort of the sound design aspect as well. Like I like the melodic parts, but I like to work kind of non-traditional, non-melodic elements into things as well. It's kind of what gets me excited. Yeah.
Cool, that's awesome. We'll head on to Matt here.
Well, like John, I started off in radio, but I was a voice talent, Madman Matt Halloran, when I was 13 years old. My high school had a radio station, like one of the only ones in Michigan that had a radio station. It was a whopping 100 watts, so it kind of went past the parking lot of the high school. And I remember being super excited. And I ran to my the woman who ran the program. Her name was Chris. And I said, Chris, at 13, I know what I want to be when I grow up. And she said, well, please don't tell me it's a DJ. And I was like, damn. And so needless to say, throughout a whole bunch of other things, my business partner, a Canadian friend, Kirk Lowe, who's in Oshawa, and I, about 4.5 years ago, started a company. It's now called Proudmouth. And from an audio branding perspective, we do the opposite of what John does. So we are the content providers for the audio sound, the profiles and all of that sort of stuff. So we actually focus specifically on podcasting. We've produced about 2,000 podcasts now in the last 4 years. Our podcast, the Top Advisor Marketing Podcast, we've done about 300 of those. We're about to launch a new podcast. So podcasting is my specialty, whether it comes from performance, content creation, editing, post-production. That's all the stuff that is my area of expertise.
Cool,
2,000
awesome.
podcasts. That's incredible. What's up, everyone? I'm Shez. See some familiar faces on the attendees. What's up, everyone? My background is really as a DJ. So Matt, I would have disappointed your teacher or counselor that you mentioned there. I did my degree in marketing, and I always had a passion for collecting records since I was a little kid. And I quit my co-op at Scotiabank downtown Toronto to focus on this passion of vinyl and DJing. It ended up working out really well. It turned into a lucrative full-time career, which led me around Canada and then around the world, playing all kinds of events for all kinds of audiences, from nightclubs to film festivals and galas and all sorts of stuff. And that's when I really got unique global perspective as to how sound in and of itself is able to influence people and take them on this psychological, physical journey, in some cases where they didn't even speak the language of the music that I was playing. And as I sort of transitioned out of my DJ career into an experiential marketing career, I always led with, the the focus being on music and being on sound, I thought it was such an important part of the experience in experiential marketing. And that's really how this all kind of gelled together for me. I had a firsthand perspective as to how sound played a part in experiences. And then, again, a natural transition, like John mentioned, into the ad industry. I saw a huge gap as to how brands and their agencies of record were treating sound and audio at large, right? They were leaving it to the end of the scope of work, and it was always a post conversation. And I wondered, I thought maybe if we move sound and audio to the beginning, what might the possibilities be, omni-channel and omni-platform? So in terms of specialties, I guess, that is my focus, is strategically thinking about audio, and whether it's within the context of media buying or experiential marketing or retail or traditional advertising and branding, what might the possibilities be when we move audio to the top of the strategy and planning phase versus thinking about it, at the very end when everything else in the P&L has been accounted for, and it's, oh shit, we need to think about sound. What do we do?
Right.
So that's my perspective.
Well said.
That is awesome. It's great to have so many different perspectives in here. Awesome. We'll hop straight into our 3 questions for today. So the first one, which we touched on a little bit, is what is audio branding and what is the importance of brand sound? And we'll switch around the order and we'll start with Shez.
In a nutshell, audio branding is not much different than any other branding. It's sort of building a feeling, whereas visual branding is trying to do that visually. We are, guys, jump in and correct me at any time, by the way. We are focusing on sound. So I guess to distill it, in a world where people are looking at screens less and less, how might we be able to brand ourselves? And, if a company or an organization invests in this cumbersome creative and then does a media buy to put it on TV while the Leafs game is on, what good is that if everyone's eyes are on their second screen on Twitter and on Instagram? And to me, that's what I look at audio branding as, is how can we build affinity with a brand through sound, and how can we get eyes off that second screen and put them on the first screen, which is the screen we plan for and invested in. And to me, audio branding is really thinking about how the brand sounds, not just in terms of mnemonics and jingles and logos, but how does this brand sound everywhere it exists and everywhere it interacts with customers, whether it's B2C or B2B or B2BC, it really doesn't matter. It's just making sure that what we are putting out into the world in terms of sonic communication ladders up to who we are as a brand and our ethos and, our guidelines and so forth.
Yeah, I can only echo what Shez said. Sound is becoming more and more ubiquitous just in the marketing world in general. And I find so many brands are unprepared for it. Like we're in the midst of an audio renaissance right now. Like podcasts, streaming, went up. I think we're going to talk about this later, but streaming went up like 30% since COVID. Streaming ads, voice interface, these things are all on the rise. And when you find yourself in an audio only medium and your brand is hyper visual, none of that carries over. And when you can't see the brand, you have to be able to hear the brand.
It's fascinating listening to what you guys are talking about, because I'm just trying to figure out how, what I do plays into this. And it does, because the way that we help a client communicate their brand is by distilling their thought leadership and drawing that thought leadership out again, in the format of a podcast. What we have found is the importance of quality sound, right? So as John was just saying, if audio is all we have, it better sound really good, man. Because if it doesn't, people turn it off, right? And what we're finding, and one of the most important aspects of using sound to grow your business or to build relationships or build trust, in my opinion, as Shez was saying, it's the portability of this, right? And so what we say to our clients all the time, just to remind them, and for everybody who's listening today, when is the last time you were invited into your ideal clients or prospects' quiet time with an opt-in. That's the power of audio because it's totally portable. John?
Yeah, well, I love that you pointed that out, because what I love about sound in general is the intimacy of it. And this was true like back when I worked in radio. Podcasting is the exact same, where, if it's like a TV environment, if you have a talk show, there are dozens of people like involved, both on screen and behind the scenes. Whereas whether it's traditional radio or it's podcasting or whatever it is, in an audio format, you have one or two people, a microphone, and on the other end is a listener with virtually nothing in between. And people that listen to audio content have a different relationship from people in like a more, visual environment.
Well, and what Shez was saying too about the whole second screen thing, what we're finding a lot is that people will have an earbud in, listening to a podcast, and watching the game with the sound off, right? And so it's just amazing the portability of it. And John, my background, one of my backgrounds, I was actually a therapist, and I work with people who suffer from auditory hallucinations. And one of the things that we found very easily is that when it goes into your ear, it goes right into your Broca's area, and it's like a millimeter. Connection. So talk about pumping directly into the brain. That's why the eyes don't do that, right? So the optical, translation goes through a whole bunch of stuff where it doesn't with your ears, guys. It's so fast, it's so intimate, and it's so instantaneous. It's so powerful.
Well, sound actually reaches the brain faster than your eyes, because and you see that just in life. If you're driving and, you see a deer, there's that deer in the headlights thing. There's this moment where you freeze. Whereas if you hear a sudden sound, you react instantly and almost involuntarily.
Yeah, I just to those points, to get super nerdy about it, this is a whole other conversation if we're talking about neuroscience, but hearing is quite literally the first sense we develop, as humans, as a fetus. So there's so much to be said about how we can bypass traditional visual stimuli and communication through sound. And just to reiterate some of the points you guys mentioned, people are busy these days. They're doing so many things. They're multitasking, and companies and brands continue to pump out, communication that is so focused on visual only and copy heavy content. And the reality is they're alienating themselves by the amount of people that will not only put their eyeballs on it, but then will they actually go through and read that content? Will it connect with them, or will they get distracted by their kids, or will they be cooking in the kitchen, or do they have to drive to an appointment? And sound bypasses all of that, and they're able to multitask while listening, while getting the message through, and still being able to go on a walk, drive a car, cook a meal, work out. So, in that instance, it's actually really valuable in how we can get into people's minds and hearts and ears, whereas other mediums, such as visual mediums, just will kind of hit a wall in terms of how much they can consume.
Well, and there was a stat that came out recently saying that I think it was 61% of the time TV commercials are on, they're not actually being watched. And with sound, we have the luxury of 360 degrees of constant oral perception. And, if you have a consistent visual brand, and that audio component is consistent and working in tandem with it, then you've got something very powerful.
Yeah, I remember being, as a kid growing up, I'd be in the kitchen and then I'd hear The Simpsons. And I wouldn't see anything, but I would run to the TV because the show started or whatever the show was. But, now looking back and thinking about it, I was drawn to my television set while I was filling my cereal bowl through sound and sound alone. So thanks for bringing that up, John. I never really considered it.
Well, and another thing, sorry, we could talk all day about this. I don't know if we're getting too deep or too nerdy here or what.
Do you have a few more questions to run through, but feel free, go for it.
I don't know, should we get to those questions?
What's going on in the chat? Let's see.
Well, I do think that we're gonna continue to touch on more amazing topics within sound here in just a second.
Well, what I was going to say, I'll just get it out. What we find a lot of the time, not always, but a lot of the time, visuals provide the information, sounds provide the emotion. And they do this exercise like with film students. Well, they'll isolate the visuals and the sounds. And what they find a lot of the time is the visuals on their own sort of give us a sequence of events, but not a lot of emotional context. Whereas if you isolate the sound, you don't always know what's going on, but the sort of emotional drive is very much apparent. Yeah.
No, this is an amazing topic. One, I'm learning so much, and it feels slightly like I'm listening to David Suzuki on like the nature of things and like how my ears connect to my brain and everything like that. But I think it also pointed out to me, I was like, I created an ad for Camino, and sound was the last thing I thought about. I was like, this is a whole video, and sound was the last thing. And now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, that is so wrong to think about it now that you guys are like informing me and letting me know.
Well,
So,
it's interesting because it's wrong, but it makes sense because it
yeah.
parallels the way that we interact with the world, right? We rely on sight the most. Sound tends to fall secondary to that, and that just follows that that's the way we approach our branding and a lot of our media work. Yeah.
But now that I realize that, I realize it's also wrong of me to.
It is wrong, but I get it.
No one's faulting you. It's all
No,
good.
no. We also love you, Rowan. Don't worry about it. So
It's okay. My next one, I'll start with like, what is the audio and the visual? They need to like match and make sense and actually drive people beyond what a fun, catchy.
Yeah, you need congruency.
Yeah.
The two need to work together. Yeah.
Okay,
if you're
moving on to the second question here. What is the role of sound in the COVID/post-COVID world? And I will start with Matt this time.
well, I think all three of us have touched on this just a little bit, but one of the greatest things about audio is because we can't see each other, and we can't do the same sort of things that we have done in the past, right? We refer to it as scaled credibility, right? Your ability, in order to build credibility as a business person, in the past it was sitting on boards of directors, being in networking groups, being out in the community, shaking hands and kissing babies, right? Well, nobody better be kissing babies right now, right? And so so we have to be able to have it portable. And I think what people are finding is this medium, right? So the idea that we can, we're from all over North America right now. The simple fact that we can communicate instantaneously, portably, and with the comfort of our own freaking home, right? I really do believe that this has fundamentally changed the way that people need to pay attention to marketing. And for me, it's all about portability, right? And it's all about scale. If I can use audio to communicate my message kind of an ever-present and an omnipresent manner, where I don't have to be shaking hands, kissing babies, being on board, spending hours and hours doing those sorts of things, and just have my marketing work for me. I think that was the major epiphany a lot of people had. And to be brutally honest, it's just way safer, guys. I mean, goodness gracious. If we were really looking forward to going to the big communal event, and now that it's going to be virtual, you're going to have even more people show up, right? Because not everybody can go to Banff, and not everybody has the money to do that. And now we have the ability to do this and still impact people and show our passion and nerd out. I mean, that's I think that's what we've had the ability to do.
I guess I'll jump in. So, I think it's affected every industry, but I'll focus on two in respect of everyone's time. One being entertainment, right? We used to go to arenas and stadiums and watch performers with butts and seats and hard ticket sales. And those people are screwed. They're not touring. There's no live shows, but there is now an opportunity to create, audio content, audio visual content, well-produced content, and serve it directly to their audience at large across the world, which arguably can generate more revenue for them than going venue to venue, limited to capacity restrictions and so forth. So I think artists and the entertainment industry at large is rethinking their own business model, and audio plays a huge part into that. And the other is retail. So when you think about it, walking into a mall, walking into a retail location, without thinking about it, we were utilizing 3, if not 4 of our senses, right? You would go in, you would see the visual display, Some stores would smell a certain way. Scent design is a whole other topic in terms of multisensory marketing. But there was a consistent scent at Abercrombie or wherever it was. And then you would touch things. You would try on the clothes, right? Seems like a lifetime ago, but you would try on a pair of jeans. And there'd be music playing, background music. So there you go, 4 senses being utilized. And now in a COVID world, everyone that hopes to survive and eventually thrive again is putting their email list to use and trying to think of their direct to consumer strategy, right? So D2C, this is the new thing. And guess what? In that marketing, in that experience, in that selling process, they're using 1 sense. So you've capitulated from 4 senses down to 1. And when you talk about brand experiences and brand affinity, it's not just marketing speak, it's reality. If I am Levi's and I used to have people experiencing my brand in 4 senses, and now I'm limited to 1, there is an opportunity to add a second sense in that journey, in that customer journey, in that selling proposition, which is sound and hearing. Now, do you want to pollute them with noise? No, you have to think about it strategically. But just like when I pay in the Apple store and there's a very distinct sound to tell me my payment has gone through, maybe if I click on one of their links, there's a distinct sound that is their own brand sound. Maybe when I'm reading their newsletter, instead of reading about a product or a new pair of jeans, I could click an image and it can be a sonic image now, which will have descriptive audio embedded in it. So I can continue my shopping journey within the context of e-commerce. I can keep browsing, but still learn about the product, right? And I think brands haven't really begun wrapping their head around the implications here. But if you can ladder up and increase your sensorial experience with a consumer, 100% by literally adding another sense when you have 1 and now you have 2, that being hearing or audio, there might be huge implications there. And, companies like Shopify, I don't know if they did it intentionally, but they are doing this. So every time a Shopify merchant makes a sale, that Shopify chime goes off on their app and it alerts them that they've just made money, which is really powerful from a brand building perspective, even though it's B2B and with their own customers, because Shopify is telling them they've just made money. So without them really thinking about it, they're hitting them with this shot of dopamine, which maybe subconsciously is building, a positive affinity with Shopify as their partner or as their reseller partner or whatever the case is. So I think you're going to start seeing companies thinking about how they strategically use sound and audio in a post-pandemic world where people might not care to go into stores and might have been acclimated to e-commerce in more meaningful ways, or they're just used to the D2C journey and now products are showing up at their door every other day, Amazon boxes and home meal kits and so forth. But in those experiences, what might the implications be? If I get a meal kit, why am I only getting a pamphlet to read that recipe? Why is there not a paired audible experience that through my smart speaker now guides me through cooking that meal? And these are all low-hanging fruit opportunities that I think brand teams are gonna really need to wrap their head around as they have to pull from their experiential budget and reallocate it. And I think audio is gonna take a huge chunk of that traditional XM budget. Speaking from someone that ran an XM shop and still does, they're looking for new ways to interact with consumers. And I think audio is gonna be leading that charge in many, many ways. Sorry, long-winded answer there.
Very awesome one, though. Awesome. We'll head on to John, if you want to add on.
Yes to everything that Matt and Shez said. Shez, especially the experiential point, definitely. And I'm glad you brought up the dopamine thing too. That's huge, and it's so powerful if you can have a positive experience attached to a branded sound. That goes a long way. In terms of COVID, from my perspective, COVID has really accelerated a lot of what was already happening. Like I said, streaming has increased 30%, 32%, I believe. And a lot of brands are just not prepared for audio only media. And a lot of them, you see a lot of them, they end up in what I like to call branding blind spots, where again, if you are hyper visual and you don't consider that multi-sensory experience, none of that carries over.
Absolutely. Is there anything else that anybody wants to add on to this
I just wanted to add to what
question?
Shez was saying there that I guess I know why I kept getting kicked out of Abercrombie, because I was actually using all 5 senses and I was chewing on the jeans, and I guess they didn't like that anymore. So.
Nice.
Fifth sense, little iffy for the clothing shops. Awesome.
How do we want to navigate the questions in the chat? Do we want to save them for later? I know people are asking a number of things. You want to get through your questions first, Rowan?
Yeah,
or?
yeah. We have
Okay,
one more
cool.
question, and then we'll head to a full Q&A period.
Actually, if I could add one more thing before we move on from the COVID component. I do want to be respectful of the time. I don't know. We got some time still. Yeah. Another interesting thing that happened at the start of COVID, and I talk about brands not being prepared. There's an amazing thing that happened where all the commercials for like the first maybe 3 or 4 weeks of COVID were exactly the same. And there's actually a YouTube clip. If you haven't seen it, you can look it up. It's basically called that, something like every COVID commercial is exactly the same. And they all started with this kind of somber piano music. And then there was that voiceover that said, in these troubled times, in these uncertain times, these unprecedented, whatever the adjective was. And then they'd build it a little bit. And then they'd get into that since 19, blah, blah, blah. We've been there for you and we always will. And then it just culminates to a reveal of the logo at the end. And it was amazing because what they ended up doing was, instead of branding themselves, they kind of branded the pandemic in a really weird way. And I had a meeting with a client a while back. We were going over the new brand video and I was like, you guys used COVID music. It's kind of like sad and depressing and airy and stuff. And the brands that had their sonic identity figured out, they were able to, they didn't have to use that sad piano music. They were able to take their existing audio identity and just kind of flex it and kind of scale it back, use that same audio DNA and adapt it to the existing environment. And one brand that did it really well was State Farm, and they've had the same audio identity for like 50 years now. And all they did was they just took what they were already using and just dialed it back a little bit, and it was great. Yeah.
That's really cool. Thinking back on it, I definitely saw that happen so many times. Like every single commercial was that slow, sad music. And I just stopped even paying attention to them. And then when something fun and boppy would come on, that would attract my attention because I was looking for good news and something better than what everybody was.
You didn't want to just be reminded of how bad everything was.
Of being stuck in my house all day. Yeah. Awesome. We'll head on to the last question. And then after this last question, we'll head to all of your questions that you've sent in through the chat and Q&A. If you have any more, feel free to send them through as well. Awesome. So last question. What are common mistakes made with audio branding and sound? John, we'll start with you.
Well, I think we've touched on it a little bit already. I think there are a lot of mistakes that are made. I think most of them you can circumvent by just being proactive and having an audio branding strategy and having audio assets that you can leverage. And I think the other component is really just having an awareness. And I find a lot of brands, and myself included, a lot of us lack a sense of self-awareness about our own brand. It's really hard to objectify yourself, right? So when it becomes time to sort of, because when you produce an audio branding strategy and you produce these audio assets, you need to have a really clear understanding of how does your brand feel? Because it's a very emotional thing. A sound is inherently emotional. So a lot of brands, we have to ask them the hard questions like, how does your brand make people feel? How does it make the world a better place? What is its history? What is its future? How does it fit into the world? Because all of that stuff gets sonified and put into audio branding guidelines. And if we're going to do that, there's a clear understanding that needs to be acquired. If the brand can't properly be expressed externally until it's fully understood internally.
Absolutely. I definitely agree with that. And I think that's a struggle that a lot of people have found, just expressing their brands correctly when they themselves don't know necessarily what their vision and future and impact wants to be. We'll head on to Matt here for his input.
the biggest thing that I think is people only remember about 25% of what they hear. So one of the biggest mistakes I think people have is they're so concerned about being repetitive. Whereas John was just saying, the State Farm people have had the same freaking audio logo forever, right? I can sing it right now. And so, that sort of repetition is really, really important, guys. I wanna make sure that we're clear on that. But I think the other thing is Ernest Hemingway said, if I'm not crying when I'm writing it, they're not crying when they're reading it. Okay. And I say this to everybody. I've got a whole pregame when somebody comes on our podcast. I remind them to watch their ums, so's, and knows, and turn off notifications and blah blah blah. And then I also say, if you feel like you've been talking too long, you probably have been. Which is another thing that I think a lot of people really fall down on, is they don't realize that people want to hear a conversation. They don't want to be talked at. They want to feel like they're listening to people, right? So that's one of the biggest mistakes, especially in podcasting, is solo casting. I think it's a terrible idea. But getting back to the Ernest Hemingway quote, since I can't see your micro expressions, right? I can't see your cool ass backgrounds that all of you have. I mean, Rowan, I'm sorry, you got a freaking door. But you look what Chez got, some cool ass artwork. He's got a turntable back there, a keyboard. John's got all, So most people don't have that visual sort of stuff when we're looking in audio only. So you have to bring it up. Right. And the biggest mistake people have with bringing their energy up, as you can tell, I just have a little bit of energy as a person, but one of the biggest issues that happens is they don't maintain that energy for the complete sentence. So what happens is this: they'll start it, they're really excited, and then they start running out of wind because they don't know how to breathe, and then they get really quiet. What that makes it seem like you're less confident. And so totally tangential, and I don't have any idea if this is answering the darn question, but something that I really wish audio or voice people would do, especially hosting a podcast, is learn how to freaking breathe. You have to breathe from your diaphragm, everybody. If anybody's ever sung in their life, you breathe from your belly. And the great thing about audio is nobody can see your belly, so you don't have to freaking worry about it. So just big, deep breath through your belly and support yourself with your diaphragm. And that will allow you to maintain consistent volume in your sentences, make you come across as being a lot more passionate, a lot more confident, and make it so that you don't have people like, what did they say at the end? So those are my things. Rowan, was that anywhere near where I was supposed to go with that?
Yeah, well, it's just touching on different mistakes you see people make with audio. My voice teacher would probably point out that that's one of my mistakes, but that's for singing, so that's a whole nother thing. But yeah, absolutely. I think that's definitely touching on a mistake, and that's made me stop listening to podcasts, is when people start to kind of quiet down, and then the next sentence they're super loud, and then they slowly, it feels like a bad roller coaster where I'm just going up and down, and I'm like turning up the volume, turning down the volume, turning up the volume. So I definitely see that as a mistake that I've experienced. Heading on to Chez here.
So that's a great segue into my thought, and leaning into the notion of inconsistency, right? So there's two things. One is inconsistency. I know that this is the red bank, and this is the green bank, and this is the blue bank in terms of visual identity, and yet these banks and these massive Fortune 1000 and Fortune 100 companies, sometimes they don't have any sense of who they are sonically. And so what they're trying to do is run around like a headless chicken, um, leasing different assets for different points of communication. And they would never change their logo color, right? Like TD is not going to be orange one day. They've invested so heavily into being the green bank. That is, all of their communication is green. That's what you know them as. And yet they don't, not to pick on them, but any bank in Canada, I would argue, doesn't have a distinct sonic identity. So if we get, and we get them a lot, these rigid, stringent guidelines, you've all seen them, the 80-page brand Bible PDF. This is our visual identity. It must be protected meticulously. This is our written identity. We can only be written about in a certain, frame or whatever. And there's no thought as to, well, what is the audible identity? What is the sonic identity? You're showing up in over-the-top platforms, Hulu, Twitch, Netflix. Whole other categories are now being born. If a brand integrates into a Clubhouse room or chat, where are the guidelines to gatekeep and protect their brand with this moat that they've built so passionately? So one is, to John's point, building that with them and having it ladder up to the visual and verbal identity that they've invested in so heavily, and that is ubiquitous across every platform that they exist on. And then the other is actually implementing that, right? It's one thing to go through this process, build it all out for them, serve them the brand guidelines, but then how do you get senior leadership to actually understand that this wasn't just a fly-by-night thing we invested in for the sake of checking a box and we're now up to date with the times? This needs to be implemented strategically and intentionally with our partners, with our agency partners, with our production partners. Everywhere we are serving our brand, we better also serve, these sonic guidelines. And we worked with MasterCard on some stuff, and they were very protective of how we use their sonic identity. So I have to give it up to them. Like, they didn't only invest in it superficially for the sake of saying they did it. They followed through and through, and their agency McCann and Momentum and so forth, they were all on board. So I was really impressed with how their agency partners were like really protective of their clients' sonic identity in the same way that they were their visual identity. So you have to create it, you have to do that authentically, but then you have to implement it through and through, because you can't lease equity, right? You can't lease and rent assets here and there hoping that that will ladder up to building your brand. You have to, unfortunately, build it step by step, build it brick by brick, build it consistently. And it's not an overnight process. You have to invest in this as a long-term strategy. And you might make tweaks and changes along the way when things change and a pandemic hits, for State Farm to tweak their brand a little bit. But at least they have a foundational asset or set of assets that they've built that they can then skew or change or tweak a little bit. But yeah, investing in the brand and then implementation is crucial. You can't change your voice depending on where you decide to speak up. If you're on Clubhouse or Netflix or out of home advertising, um, it needs to be seamless. And now more than ever, I think people are looking for brands that they can trust, that make them feel good, subliminally. And the reality is, if a brand's voice changes every time I interact with them, or every platform that they're speaking to me on as a consumer, subconsciously there's distrust there. I'm not going to trust them as much as someone who's consistent every time. And yeah, those are my thoughts.
I have a question to kind of build off that for you, Shez. Have you noticed, like in your work, that people who have a consistent brand voice, audio voice, tend to be market leaders?
The short answer is yes. You look at all of the insurance companies that have invested in this stuff, and now with Mastercard spent a lot of money over the last 2 years investing in this. They've gone so far as to make sure that they have a contactless payment sound every time you tap a Mastercard at a POS across all of their countries that they're operational in. And all of these subtle nuances ladder up to building a sense of trust within Mastercard. And they're doing well. They're doing well as an organization. I would say they're leading the charge, not just sonically, but with innovation, as a financial company and a financial institution. So yeah, and then you look at taking it away from brand and advertising and going back to something like kids television shows, right? I have a 4-year-old now, so I've seen my fair share of Paw Patrol episodes, and I've heard my fair share of Paw Patrol and Peppa Pig. And these producers, they get it, right? They understand that the sonic language in their visual medium is greatly supported, likely 50-50, by the audio messaging and the sonic language to support that visual medium. And they're often communicating sometimes complex emotional concepts that a 2 or 3-year-old might not yet be able to grasp, but they're reinforcing those emotional concepts and bad or good decisions, or something that's not trustworthy or trustworthy, through sound. So you look at the biggest movies in Hollywood, and you look at the biggest television shows and kids TV shows, they build their sonic identity and treat it with the same regard and respect as their visual identity, and the two are treated as equals. Whereas for some reason, advertising and branding communications, it's still thought of as 90-10 at best.
Yeah. Wow. Cool. That's awesome. Did John or Matt have anything to add on there?
Yes to everything that Shez said. I would like to just sort of stress what he was saying about consistency. You're really playing the long game with audio branding. It's not something you just do because it's fashionable and then you forget about it. Like I worked with a brand a couple of years ago. We went through the whole process, and after a while they just kind of like forgot about it. And quite frankly, like, and I got paid, I'm in the business to make money, but I'm also in business to be effective. And if I knew their level of commitment at the beginning, I would have passed on it, quite frankly. Yeah, you're playing the long game. It takes a lot of the time, it takes years to be part of the public consciousness. Like we talked about State Farm, and McDonald's has always been really good that way. And Intel, and there's all these famous audio identities. They didn't just do it overnight. They were consistent. Like they went through the process. They had a strategy. They produced those guidelines that we talk about, and they were consistent. And that's not to say that you can't flex, that you can't shift over time. Like if you have a consistent melody and you have that audio DNA built in, you can adjust it to the times. Like Intel even did, they've been running the same one for like 25 years. They just did a rebrand, like a sonic rebrand just recently. It's the same melody, it's just kind of a different texture for what they were already using.
Cool. That's very interesting. I don't think I pay attention to audio rebrands as much as visual rebrands. Like if McDonald's did something with their sound though, I'd pay way more attention to it than the attention that I paid to Burger King's new rebrand, I would say. Like if somebody
Well,
changed the
yeah. Well, McDonald's is a great example because they've had their da 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 for about 15 years now. And the melody has been consistent, but the instrumentation and the tone changes with almost every commercial. But they're just so powerful that they can do that. And that's like a big power move. And not to get too deep, I guess we got to get to questions, but with visual logos, you'll see brands that will sort of pare down their logo and they'll like remove the ornaments, they'll go monochromatic. If you have a strong audio brand, you can do the same thing. You can take out the singing, you can scale back the instrumentation, and if you're recognized and you're powerful enough and you have reached that point where you become part of the public consciousness, it allows you to just bring it right down to its bones, and again to adjust it to the times if need be.
Absolutely. We'll hop into some questions here. We have one from Rob Howard. When does a brand know it's ready to begin developing audio brand assets to add to its identity system and marketing arsenal? What are the prerequisites?
Immediately.
I think. What was that, Shez?
I was just going to say, if you're going to be in market, speaking to people on, platforms and channels that are relevant, whether it's TV or Instagram or Twitter, wherever it is, if you're communicating with people, you should have a sonic strategy in the same vein that you're coming up with a visual and a verbal one. It's almost a trifecta in terms of branding. You need a cohesive identity, and I think sound is a large part of that. So I'm likely biased, but my answer is, if you're building a brand either from scratch or reinventing or trying to ladder up your brand and carve out a better market position, you have to consider audio. You have to, otherwise you're going to get left behind.
I think what I was saying before, just really having an awareness of your brand values, your brand attributes, and how your brand makes people feel is crucial to putting together an audio branding strategy. And the other thing is really just taking kind of an inventory of your audio, like look at your sonic footprint. How much sound are we actually putting out? And a lot of the time, it's a lot more than you think. It's not even just media. It's things like touch points. Like if it's a bank, somebody uses the ATM. Do they hear a generic beep that the engineer created when they made that machine, or do they hear a branded sound that enhances that experience? Especially when you're getting cash, even if it's your own cash, you love getting cash, right? So why not have your brand attached and to that positive experience? And even things like like product sounds. If you have a product that makes a unique sound, you need to own that. Like, because Rice Krispies is a boring cereal, but somebody realized it made a sound, and they've been running with that for close to 100 years now.
That's very cool. Sound is blowing my mind right now, how much it's in everything, but I wasn't paying attention to it, but it was affecting my choices. And just all the subliminal things that are associated with sound, which I had never paid attention to, which I'm learning today. It's very cool. Matt, did you have anything to add, or can we head on to the next question here? Head on to the next one. I think this one's more for you as well. It's from Haley, and she says, I am a voiceover artist who works in commercials, narration, e-learning, and podcasts. Any perspective on AI voices? At the moment, in the general opinion, seems to be they lack emotion for effective branding.
I think that there are brands that could really use the artificially sort of feel in order to accentuate who they are and what they do. Software as a service is a great example. Fintech is a good example. Those sorts of things. I think that those could be okay. But I don't know. Did anybody? And I'm going to nerd out here. If anybody saw the newest Star Wars, right? There was Luke Skywalker as a young Luke Skywalker, and you could just tell it wasn't him, man. Like it was just digitally and artificially enough. Where you're like, meh, that's AI. People can sense that super fast with your ears. I don't think it has the inflection capability. I don't think artificial intelligence has truly worked out all of the kinks in the nuances in our voice. And it goes back to the Hemingway quote, right? How do you teach an AI, to want people to feel something while they're experiencing the audio? And I mean, we've worked with a couple of AI companies, and nobody's come even close to that. So Haley, I think your job's safe for a while, because I think people are really truly going to want to hear and feel like they're connecting with an actual human.
Well, and if I could add to that, Haley, if Matt said, if you're worried about losing your job, as someone like I do a lot of voiceover work myself, and I think that the AI is certainly a lot better than it used to be. The concatenation is a lot better than it used to be, and not a lot of people know this, but you can actually deep fake voices right now. You can clone voices, and it's creepy. It's not totally believable yet, but it gets better all the time. But the thing that a lot of people, and not just with voice, but I think with the digital realm in general, a lot of it, most digital technology is designed to reproduce things that already exist in real life. So I think that the challenge we have in the future, with voice, is producing something that's original, that no one has been able to replicate already, and to develop those instincts as well. And I coach voiceovers all the time, and I always have to, the people who are voicing, they're not necessarily wrong in their choices, but there are certain things, there are all these nuances of storytelling that need to work concurrently with the visuals. There's all kinds of nuance that I don't think is going to be sort of appropriated by digital technology anytime soon.
Awesome. Shez, anything did you wanted to add there?
Not really. I think they nailed it. One thought is I do think you'll start seeing more use cases with AI for not necessarily creating emotional impact, but just kind of getting through the motion. So if I am, if I'm the Globe and Mail and I'm serving lots of copy heavy content to people, I might now integrate an AI component where I can upload all of that copy and make it audible. And the intent might not be to connect deeply and emotionally to try and fake people out to think this is a human, but I'm serving a purpose from an accessibility perspective now, where I can speak to people that might not be able to read that content, whether they're blind or visually impaired. And there is a helpful use case for how AI is being integrated from that perspective. But yeah, to each of John and Matt's points, I don't think we're even close to replacing the human element of where we are currently.
That is Very fair. I think I would definitely agree. If I hear personally as a like a consumer of sound, if I hear a AI voice, I think the only thing that it could ever inspire is fear when it's in a like a horror movie or something. But it hasn't inspired happiness or any other type of emotion for me. Heading on to the next question here. Do you think audio branding helps artists reach out to a bigger audience? For example, brands like Apple, Levi's, etc., have started integrating powerful music with their advertising.
Mm. I could say a lot about this, which may sort of degenerate into a rant, but I've always had a lot of issues with using popular. I wrote a blog about this a while back too, about using popular songs in ads. I think I usually dissuade my clients from doing that. For one thing, it's really expensive. And often it benefits the artist more than it does the brand. Um, there are several problems. First of all, you can't take ownership of that. That's not audio branding. Like, you're not creating culture, you're reflecting culture when you do that. You can't take any ownership over that music. And there's a lot of, I dissuade people from using stock music, because same thing, you can't take ownership of it. But stock music, like, it's better than it's ever been, ever. So I mean, there's that option, but a lot of the time, popular songs are just distracting from the message that you're trying to convey. If somebody hears their favorite song, they're focused on the song. They're not really focused on what you have to say anymore. So you need to be very careful with that. And also, uh, musical artists are not brand ambassadors, right? They're not there to represent your brand. If they get caught up in some sort of scandal, they're bringing you down with them. So you got to be really careful with that stuff.
Anything to add, Matt or Shez?
I'll jump in. Uh, to John's point, sorry. Aside from it not being your own music, you're also handcuffed as to how and where you might be able to use that music that you've licensed or synced. And there's typically a timeline and a specific set of channels that you can, use that music based on the length of a campaign. And when you really add up, we do this all the time because what we really focus on a lot is going in and auditing what brands have been doing and reallocating their inefficient, wasteful advertising dollars into investing in themselves. And when we go and audit and look at how much money they've wasted syncing random songs that A, don't ladder up to their brand ethos and message, and B, are completely restrictive as to how and where they can use those songs, you start seeing hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars spent with nothing left to show after the fact. So yes, it is much more beneficial to an artist. If you're an artist and you want to get your music in the new Apple commercial, that's great. People might watch that commercial and discover your song. Now, Apple is an interesting example because, tremendously powerful brand, and they're still syncing other people's music, but they do have this ecosystem of sound that they own very dearly. And it's, again, subconscious. We're not thinking about the sound our iPhone makes when we lock it that instills trust and security. We're not thinking about that ominous hum when we start up our MacBook that is telling us we can trust in their technology. We're not thinking about, that payment noise when we pay in the Apple Store. But this cohesive ecosystem, they understand subconsciously how they can tap into our brains and build their brand. They're still licensing music here and there, which we might ding them for. But on the flip side, they're doing a lot of things right. So yeah, if you're an artist, by all means, go ahead, go sync your music everywhere and get paid, and retain your masters and retain ownership. What I would do and what we suggest brands do if they want to get in bed with an artist or license their likeness for their campaign or their message is, instead of just leasing a song that artist has made that everyone knows, if the intent is to leverage that artist's likeness and pair it with your brand, we suggest you actually work with that artist, create a net new asset that the brand has ownership in as well. Now, when the brand owns a percentage of those masters, as that song performs and does its own thing, it actually drives revenue back to that brand, in some cases offsetting some of their marketing spend and their media spend. So I think, I think there are ways to do it that are wins, collective wins for everyone. But you can't just go throw money at bands and singers and pop stars, hoping that it's going to drive traction, and build any equity in your campaign or your brand. It's just not an efficient way to spend your money.
Absolutely. Matt, was there anything additional that you wanted to weigh in on?
Way out of my league, Rowan. I'm totally gonna leave it to the experts on that one.
Yeah, podcast's a little different, still very usable audio, just different industries there. Okay, we have one more question from Colin, and then if anybody else has Q&A questions, I'll be checking through the chat as well just before we end here. So the question is, musically, what are the key things to building into a commercial soundtrack?
That's a big question. I don't know if we've got time for that. I mean, there's a whole process for that. I mean, if we're talking about just music for a commercial, I mean, it just needs to help tell the story. But I mean, if we're brand building, again, it just starts with having a clear understanding of your brand values and attributes, and then again, just sonifying them, just going through the process of figuring out how do we sound, and then put it into audio branding guidelines and building a strategy, right? And when we do these guidelines, it lays out sort of the do's and don'ts of just about everything, like instrumentation and pace and genre, style. And then it comes down to, there's voice that factors into it as well. How does the voice sound? Is it male? Is it female? Is it old? Is it young? Is it authoritative? Is it effervescent? What is the language style? What is the accent? What are the key words? There's I could ramble on about this for a long time, but we need to be respectful of people's time. I don't know if you guys want to
Hey,
jump
John
in on this one.
or Chess, do you guys, can you share? I don't know how we would do this, Rowan, but do you guys have an example of that? Like, I'm sitting here thinking to myself, dude, I don't even know where that list would begin, right? So like everybody's seen, like Chess was talking about the brand guidelines, right? I mean, some of them are like, dude, you step 2 centimeters away from this and we will hunt you down, right? But I've never really seen audio guidelines like this. That'd be really neat for me. I mean, I'm just being selfish here. I mean, you guys can freaking email it to me, but I don't know if that would be beneficial to the audience, and I don't know if that's something that John or Shez, if you've written a blog about that, if Rowan can put that in the replay, I that just seems to be something, man, I would love to personally see that.
Yeah, I don't think we have time to go through that now, but I'd love to go through that or share that with anybody who's interested. Yeah, we can figure that out later if we want. Yeah.
Yeah, same thing here. We've done quite a few of them, and sometimes they're super technical. We're just finishing a 70 pager right now, and you think, what sound? How is sound 70 pages? Well, sound
Well,
is
actually, Shez, I'd love to compare notes with you
yeah. Let's
sometime.
do
I
it,
don't think
man.
we've talked about that before. Yeah.
Anytime, I'm always game.
Awesome.
Awesome. So we will find a way to connect and get our listeners here as well some tips and tricks and see what.
I love that you called them listeners.
Yeah, the listeners. Now that I'm all about audio. But yeah, we will definitely get them some information. We'll touch base and make sure to get it out to everybody. So we're gonna wrap up here, guys. If there's any plugs, we're going to send out everybody's link in the following up email to connect with you all on Communo. Yeah, so that's about everything. Thank you guys so much for being here today. It was absolutely fantastic. Any last thoughts for all of our listeners today?
I'd just like to say this was fun. Thank you, everybody who joined us today. And thank you, Rowan, for putting this together.
Yeah, likewise. And I encourage everyone to sound so cheesy of me, but to listen more and listen for those subtle nuances in your day-to-day life that you actually, normally would never think about, whether it's buying a coffee and tapping your credit or debit card and hearing a little mnemonic there. If that sound wasn't there, you would wonder, did my payment go through? So try and catch yourself and find these little instances in your day-to-day where sound is actually communicating so much without you even thinking about it. And it's a fun exercise. You start realizing that there's this entire world of sound out there that affects our lives in so many ways that we just don't even consider. So that's it.
Rowan, thank you. And Shez and John, dude, I just learned so much. I can't wait to go back and talk to my partner about this. And we want to, our Proudmouth really wants to thank Communal for all of the magnificent stuff you guys do. So thanks for that.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys. Thank you. Thanks, Ron. And thanks to everyone who jumped on this. Appreciate it.
Yeah, it was fantastic. I look forward to connecting with you all more on Communo. Have a fantastic day, everybody. See you.
Take care. See ya.